Hey, all you crazy hooligans and you wackos and goons out there. I'm here with another chapter of Tuck Everlasting. This will be chapter 17. Let's go ahead and see what's under the hood. Chapter 17. For the second morning in a row, Winnie Foster woke early. Outside in the ring of trees around the pond, the birds were celebrating, giving the new day a brass band's worth of greeting. Winnie freed herself from the twisted quilt and went to a window. Mist lay on the surface of the water, and the light was still pale. It looked unreal, and she felt herself unreal, waking where she had, with her hair wild and her dress all crumpled. She rubbed her eyes, through the dewy weeds below the window, a toad hopped suddenly into view, and Winnie peered at it eagerly. But no, of course it wasn't the same toad. In remembering the other toad, her toad, she thought now, almost fondly. It seemed to her that she had been away from home for weeks. Then she heard a step on the loft stairs and thought, Jessie! At once her cheeks flamed, but it was Miles. He came into the parlor, and when he saw that she was up, he smiled and whispered, Good, you're awake. Come on, you can help me catch some fish for breakfast. This time Winnie was careful not to make a noise when she climbed into the rowboat. She made her way to the seat in the stern, and Miles handed her 2 old cane poles. Watch out for the hooks, he warned, and a jar of bait, pork fat cut into little pieces. A big brown night moth fluttered out from under the oar blades, propped beside her on the seat, and wobbled off toward nowhere through the fragrant air. And from the bank something plopped into the water. A frog! Winnie caught just a glimpse of it as it scissored away from the shore. The water was so clear that she could see tiny brown fish near the bottom, flickering this way and that. Miles pushed the rowboat off and sprang in, and soon they were gliding up toward the near end of the pond, where the water came in from the stream. The locks grated as the oars dipped and swung, but Miles was skillful. He rowed without a single splash. The dripping from the blades as they lifted sent rows of overlapping circles spreading silently behind them. It was very peaceful. They'll take me home today, thought Winnie. She was somehow certain of this, and began to feel quite cheerful. She had been kidnapped, but nothing bad had happened, and now it was almost over. Now, remembering the visits of the night before, she smiled, and found that she loved them, this most peculiar family. They were her friends, after all, and hers alone. How'd you sleep? Miles asked her. All right, she said. That's good. I'm glad. Ever been fishing before? No, she told him. You'll like it. It's fun. And he smiled at her. The mist was lifting now, and as the sun poked up above the trees and the water sparkled, Miles guided the rowboat near a spot where lily pads lay like upturned palms on the surface. We'll let her drift some here, he said. There'll be trout down in those weeds and stems. Here, give me the poles and I'll bait the hooks for us. Winnie sat watching him as he worked. His face was like Jessie's, and yet not like. It was thinner, without Jessie's rounded cheeks, and paler, and his hair was almost straight, clipped neatly below the ears. His hands were different, too, the fingers thicker, and the skin scrubbed-looking, but black at the knuckles and under the nails. Winnie remembered then that he worked sometimes as a blacksmith, and indeed his shoulders, under his threadbare shirt, were broad and muscled. He looked solid, like an oar, whereas Jessie, well, she decided Jessie was like water, thin and quick. Miles seemed to sense that she was watching him. He looked up from the bait jar, and his eyes, returning her gaze, were soft. Remember I told you he had 2 children? He asked. Well, one of them was a girl. I took her fishing, too. His face clouded then, and he shook his head. Her name was Anna. Lord, how sweet she was, that child. It's queer to think she'd be close to 80 now, if she's even still alive. And my son? He'd be 82. Winnie looked at his young, strong face, and after a moment she said, "Why didn't you take them to the spring and give them some of the special water?" "Well, of course we didn't realize about the spring while we were still on the farm," said Miles. "Afterwards I thought about going to find them. I wanted to, heaven knows, but—" "Winnie, how'd it have been if I had? My wife was nearly 40 by then, and the children? Well, what was the use? They'd have been near growed themselves. They'd have had a pa close to the same age they was. No, it'd all have been so mixed up and peculiar. Just wouldn't have worked. Then pa, he was dead set against it anyway. The fewer people know about the spring, he says, the fewer there are to tell about it. Here's your pole. Just ease the hook down in the water. You'll know when you get a bite." Winnie clutched the pole, sitting sidewise in the stern, and watched the baited hook sink slowly down. A dragonfly, a brilliant blue jewel, darted up and paused over the lily pads, then swung up and away. From the nearest bank, a bullfrog spoke. "There certainly are a lot of frogs around here," Winnie observed. "That's so. They'll keep coming, too, as long as the turtles stay away. Snappers, now. They'll eat a frog soon as look at him." Winnie thought about this peril to the frogs and sighed. "It'd be nice," she said, "if nothing ever had to die." "Well, now, I don't know," said Miles. "If you think on it, you come to see there'd be so many creatures, including people. We'd all be squeezed in right next to each other before long." Winnie squinted at her fishing line and tried to picture a teeming world. She said. "Yes, I guess you're right." Suddenly the cane pole jerked in her hands and bent into an arch. The tip dragged down nearly to the water's surface. Winnie held on tight to the handle, her eyes wide. "Hey," cried Miles, "look there, you got a bite. Fresh trout for breakfast, Winnie." But as suddenly as he spoke, the pole whipped straight again, and the line went slack. "Shucks," said Miles, "it got away." "I'm kind of glad," Winnie admitted, easing her rigid grip on the butt of the pole. "You fish, Miles. I'm not so sure I want to." So they drifted for a little longer. The sky was blue and hard now. The last of the mist dissolved, and the sun, stepping higher above the trees, was hot on Winnie's back. First week of August was asserting itself after a good night's sleep. It would be another searing day. A mosquito appeared and sat down on Winnie's knee. She slapped at it absently, thinking about what Miles had said. If all the mosquitoes lived forever, and if they kept on having babies, it would be terrible. The Tucks were right. It was best if no one knew about the spring, including the mosquitoes. She would keep the secret. She looked at Miles, and then she asked him, "What will you do if you've got so much time?" "Someday," said Miles, "I'll find a way to do something important." Winnie nodded. That was what she wanted. "The way I see it," Miles went on, "it's no good hiding yourself away, like Pa and lots of other people. It's no good just thinking of your own pleasure either. People gotta do something useful if they're going to take up space in the world." "But what will you do?" Winnie persisted. "I don't know yet," said Miles. "I ain't had no schooling or nothing, and that makes it harder." Then he set his jaw and added, "I'll find a way, though. I'll locate something." Winnie nodded. She reached out and ran her fingers across a lily pad that lay on the water beside the boat. It was warm and very dry, like a blotter, but near its center was a single drop of water, round and perfect. She touched the drop and brought her fingertip back wet, but the drop of water, though it rolled a little, remained as round and perfect as before. And then Miles caught a fish. There it flopped in the bottom of the boat, its jaw working, its gills fanning rapidly. Winnie drew up her knees and stared at it. It was beautiful, horrible too, with gleaming rainbow-colored scales and an eye like a marble, beginning to dim even as she watched it. The hook was caught in its upper lip, and suddenly Winnie wanted to weep. "Put it back, Miles," she said. Her voice was dry and harsh. "Put it back right away." Miles started to protest, and then looking at her face, he picked up the trout and gently worked the barbed hook free. "All right, Winnie," he said. He dropped the fish over the edge of the boat. It flipped its tail and disappeared under the lily pads. "Will it be all right?" asked Winnie, feeling foolish and happy both at once. "It'll be all right," Miles assured her. And then he said, "People gotta be meat eaters sometimes, though. It's the natural way, and that means killing things." "I know," said Winnie weakly, "but still." "Yes," said Miles, "I know." It's the end of the chapter. It's a really, really interesting chapter. Let's go back and look at some stuff. Now, I'm glad we get to spend some time with Miles in this chapter. We haven't seen a whole lot of him up till now. I mean, he's been there, he said some stuff, but we talked a whole lot with Jesse. We talk a whole lot with Ma and Pa Tuck. We talk a whole lot with them. We talk a whole lot with Jesse, but we haven't seen Miles so much. Now, remember, Miles didn't go check on her that night. She was having the sleepover. Miles did not go check on her, so he cares about her, I'm sure, but here we get to see him, we get to see more of him, so that's really neat. We get to know him a little more. But right at the beginning of the chapter, right off, it's the second sentence, it says, "Outside in the ring of trees around the pond, the birds were calling." So that's the ring of trees. That's another allusion, I guess, towards the wheel, the circle. That's brought up a whole lot in this story. The circle, the wheel of time. We've fallen off the wheel is always turning. Ring of trees. Now the birds were celebrating, giving the new day a brass band's worth of greeting. Is that a personification? Now, Good, you're awake. Come on, help me catch some fish for breakfast. Now, I'm sure some people eat fish for breakfast, I'm sure. And if you want to eat fish for breakfast, that's fine. But for me, fish is more of a supper food. That's just me, though. Watch out for the hooks. She made her seat in the stern. Now, for those of you who don't know a whole lot about boats and ships, the stern is the back of the boat. The bow is the front of the boat. So the stern is at the back. So she sits at the back of the boat, and he's sitting further forward, and so he's working the oars, and that's pushing them out into the lake. Now Miles is strong. He's good at rowing. A frog plopped into the water and scissored away from shore. Have you ever seen a frog swim? They do this thing with their legs that looks like they... So maybe that's why she said that way. He rowed without a single splash. The dripping from the blades as they lifted sent rows of overlapping circles spreading silently behind them. So that's some more circles, that's some more allusions to that ring. Now, think about if there's any symbolism in all these little rings and circles going up behind them as they go forward. There's all these little rings. That's something to think about. Visits the night before. Have you ever been fishing before? No, she told him. You'll like it. It's fun. And he smiled at her. No, Miles, that's just your take on it. You might have fun fishing. I think I have fun fishing. The last time I went, it's been a minute since I've been fishing. But anyway, whether or not you have fun fishing, that's up to you. Miles has fun. I don't know about Winnie as much. Miles guided the rowboat near a spot where lily pads lay like upturned palms on the surface. Like upturned palms. That's got to be a simile. Remembered, he worked sometimes as a blacksmith. Blacksmithing is a hoot. I used to do it a little bit. Give it a try sometime. Be safe. Be safe, though, if you're blacksmithing. He looked solid, like an ore. Jessie was like water, thin and quick. So there she's thinking about, Miles, he's really strong and sturdy, and Jessie is a little more loosey-goosey. So that's got to be another couple of similes there, using like or as. So she says he looked solid, like an ore. Jessie was like water, so that's the likes right there. Now Miles is taking her fishing. He used to take his daughter fishing. That's got to be a bit of a flashback for Miles. He's probably not taking any little girls fishing since he had his own little girl. And that's really something to think about. So he's probably having a lot of flashbacks right here thinking about that. But he says he can't let his family drink from the spring because Paul doesn't want that to happen. He didn't think of it at the time, and like he said, his kids would be almost as old as he was. That wouldn't work. Like he said, you need to be able to grow. You need to be able to change and grow and keep changing like the wheel. A dragonfly, a brilliant blue jewel, darted up and passed. Brilliant blue jewel. That's so pretty. But she does not use like or as right here. Natalie does not use like or as. So that has to be a metaphor, the way she talks about that dragonfly. And then she says, snappers. Now, they'll eat a frog soon as the snapping turtles. Have you ever seen a snapping turtle? Those are some sweet-looking creatures. Too bad about the frogs, though. They snap up. Also fish. They snap up little fish sometimes, too. Some snapping turtles even have a little wiggly pink tongue that looks like a worm, so fish get to think, fish swim down and snaps them. Snapping turtle. But anyway, forget turtles. This is important. Winnie says, it'd be nice if nothing ever had to die. It's something to think about. Miles says, I don't know. Think about everything crowding in. So when he smacks that Skeeter, and then she thinks, well, no, what if that Skeeter couldn't die? What if all this whole cloud of Skeeters couldn't die? And then if they can't die and they just keep having Skeeter babies, just be zillions of Skeeters. And think about that. She says, squinted at her fishing line and tried to picture a teeming world. Now, teeming is a really good word right there, because teeming can mean really crowded, just packed with stuff. Lots of stuff moving all around, lots of stuff in there. So if you can picture everybody forever, from all of history, just crowded together, pushing, there'd be too many people. Couldn't turn around. You'd bump into somebody. There'd just be and all the animals and all the bugs and all the frogs and fish and everything. It'd be just too much. Couldn't handle that. So she thinks about that and really thinks that wouldn't be good. The spring has to stay secret. People shouldn't know about the spring. People have to be able to live and to grow and to change and then, yes, eventually die, even though that's really sad, but that's part of the wheel. That's all there is. So fish bites a hold of the hook and gets away. Now, any of you other fishers out there will see right away what she did not do. You have to set the hook. When a fish bites onto your stuff, you have to yank backwards. And that's what puts the hook. Now it's just it's nibbling at it. But now if you set the hook, that's what gets it. So she did not set the hook. That's why the fish was able to get away. I'm sure some people out there saw that right away. But the sun is Stepping higher above the trees, August was reasserting itself after a good night's sleep. That's some very neat personification right there. Winnie nodded. Or no, now Miles, because what are Ma and Pa Tuck doing? Now they're immortal and seem to be pretty, I guess, indestructible. What are they doing with this? They've lived forever, they've fallen off the wheel. What are Ma and Pa doing? It seems like they're just kind of hiding out in their house for a lot of the time. Okay. What does Jesse want to do? Jesse's immortal. He fall off the wheel. What does he want to do? Jesse wants to run around, wants to have fun, wants to do cool stuff, wants to have fun. Like, gotta be able to enjoy yourself. Come on, Winnie Foster. I says, Miles, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? He says, well, what does he say? What does he say? Hang on, I'm sorry. Hiding yourself away, people. Something. It's no good, because he says, it's no good hiding yourself away like Pa and lots of other people. And it's no good just thinking of your own pleasure either. Pa, Jesse. People gotta do something useful if they're going to take up space in the world. And useful. I like how he was vague there. He said useful. Now, he didn't say you have to do this or you have to do that. Useful. Now, what does that mean? That could mean so many things. So many things could be considered useful to so many people. It says, I ain't had no schooling or nothing, and that makes it harder, said as John added. I'll find a way, though. I'll locate something. So Miles wants to do something good for the world. He says, I'll find a way to do something important. I like Miles a whole lot now, because he wants to help people. He wants to do something good, something useful for the world. He wants to help people, and that's good for you, Miles. That's right on. She reached her hand out and touches the lily pad. It was warm and very dry, like a blotter. That's a simile again. Like a blotter. She's relating it to something else within her life. Now, this is something similar to her own life. So she's probably never touched a lily pad before, but she has touched a blotter. Now, you guys might be wondering, a blotter? Huh? That's a very interesting tool. Those were used when people were writing with quills sometimes, but then into fountain pens later on. So if you ever used a pen and just way too much ink comes out of the clicky pen or something, just way too much ink comes out and it's like goopy on the page, and if you touch it, it smudges on your thumb and shucks, I smudged it. But a blotter is when you're writing with this stuff. When you write with a quill, when you write with a fountain pen, when you're writing with this, you can take this tool. It's got a little bit of a crescent shape to it and a little handle. It's made of wood with a little pad on it. You can take this and you can rub it across the words you just wrote. You can rub it across, and that way it won't smudge. It takes off that extra ink. It keeps it from smudging. It keeps it good. The blotter. So there's that. She catches a trout, or Miles catches a trout. It is rainbow colored. Leads me to think it is the aptly named rainbow trout. It's a real kind of fish. I believe we have them in Ohio. Give it a Google. He catches it, and I like a marble. That's a simile. But she says, put it back, Miles. Put it back right away. She doesn't want to watch this poor little fish die in the boat, because it's not just... It doesn't die quick, I guess. It's in pain. It's freaking out. It's got this hook in its lip, and it can't breathe. It's sitting there. And she feels really bad for it. She feels really bad for this little fish. No, put it away. Put it back in the water. I don't want it to die. I don't want it to die. And Miles, we see before, just before he was excited, he wanted to eat fish for breakfast. But he sees this. He sees that it's upsetting her. That's fine. And puts it back. Now, he didn't complain about that. He tries to tell her people gotta be meat eaters sometime, but he didn't argue with her. He didn't say, "Oh, you goon, I wanted that fish." Man, he doesn't say any of that. He doesn't. He's a nice guy. And that's just the natural way, he says. She says, "I know, but still." And he says, "Yes, I know." He gets it. He knows it's upsetting to see this little fish die. He knows it's upsetting for her because she's a little girl. He knows it's upsetting because she's probably never seen something like this before, and she's never had to think about it. She's never had to see it and confront it. And I think that just shows he's a really sweet... He's not just a really sweet guy. He gets it. Like, he cares about her and her feelings, which is really sweet of him, I think. So that was an interesting chapter. That was chapter 17. This is really cool. This is a bit of a longer video, so sorry about that, guys. But you're all champions for sticking in there with me, and I will see you in the next video, you wild hooligans and goons.